I never thought an ordinary afternoon would set the tone
I
for something
understand
I'd
this is
carry
a
with me
difficult
forever.
situation
It
for
was
you.
one of those
It
days when you
is,
go
but
about your
I
routine
appreciate
without
you being
expecting
here.
anything extraordinary. I had stopped by a quiet cafe tucked into the corner of an old street, a place I usually went when I wanted to read, write, or just disappear into the hum of soft music and clinking cups. That's where I first noticed her. She wasn't trying to draw attention. In fact, she looked as though she belonged entirely to herself. Absorbed in the pages of a book, the steam of her coffee curling gently upward beside her. She had a kind of elegance that wasn't loud or rehearsed. The way her hair framed her face, the calm way she turned each page, even the faint lines that appeared near her eyes when she adjusted her glasses. They all spoke of a woman who had lived enough to carry herself with quiet confidence. I sat across the room, pretending to be interested in my notebook, but my eyes kept drifting back to her. It wasn't about attraction in the usual sense. It was something deeper, a gravity in the way she simply was. Our first exchange happened by accident. I was reaching for the sugar jar at the counter, the same time she extended her hand. Our fingers brushed, just a fleeting touch, but it startled me more than I cared to admit. Her skin was warm, her nails neatly kept, and when she looked up at me, her eyes carried that mixture of amusement and apology that only someone comfortable in themselves can give. "Sorry," I said quickly, pulling back. She smiled, just slightly. "No harm done." Her voice surprised me, low, smooth, carrying a faint huskiness, like a song sung in the late evening. That was the start. We ended up leaving the counter at the same time, and somehow she noticed the book tucked under my arm. "You read him too?" she asked, gesturing toward the author's name printed in bold across the cover. It turned out we had both picked up books by the same writer, though from different shelves. What began as a passing comment unraveled into a conversation that neither of us seemed eager to end. I was struck by how naturally she spoke, with ease, with wit, with a kind of honesty that didn't need to prove anything. She carried stories in her voice, and I found myself wanting to hear them all. When the barista called my order, I hesitated before leaving. She noticed. "Go on," she said with a half-smile. "Your coffee's waiting." But something in her tone, light yet inviting, made me feel as though she didn't mind if I returned. And so, with a mix of nerves and curiosity, I did. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Yet a few days later, when I walked back into that same cafe, there she was, at the same corner table, book in hand, coffee beside her. For a moment I wondered if fate had a sense of humor, or if this little cafe had suddenly become the stage for something I didn't yet understand. She looked up briefly, as if sensing someone watching, and when our eyes met, she gave a small smile. Not the polite kind you give strangers, but something warmer, a recognition. Almost like she'd been expecting me, though that was impossible. I took the table near hers, close enough that conversation felt possible, but far enough that I wasn't intruding. And sure enough, it began again. This time it wasn't books, but music. A faint tune was playing in the cafe, something older, and I found myself humming along under my breath without realizing it. "You know this song?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, a curious smile on her lips. I nodded, a little embarrassed I'd been caught. "My dad used to play it in the car when I was a kid. Didn't think anyone my age still knew it." She laughed then, a laugh that wasn't loud but full, like something had genuinely surprised her. "It was one of my favorites growing up. I didn't think anyone your age knew it either." That moment opened a door. Suddenly we were sharing pieces of ourselves we hadn't expected to. Favorite songs, the kind of films we couldn't resist rewatching, even stories about meals we swore no one else appreciated. The differences in our years seemed to fade when our words met in the middle. I noticed things about her I hadn't the first time. The way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she loved. The way her hands moved gently as she explained, as though shaping her thoughts in the air. Even the way she leaned forward just slightly when listening, giving the full weight of her attention. At one point, she teased me for knowing more about a certain film director than she did. "I'm impressed," she said, narrowing her eyes playfully. "You're not as predictable as I thought." Her teasing carried no malice. It was light, easy, almost like she was surprised at how natural this felt. I found myself smiling more freely than usual, the kind of smile you don't force but one that slips out when you're simply at ease. And every so often, there were those fleeting touches. Our hands brushing when I passed her something, her shoulder leaning close when she showed me a passage from her book. Small, almost accidental moments, but ones that lingered far longer in my chest than they should have. By the time I left the cafe that day, I realized something. She wasn't just someone I'd met by chance. She was someone who made the world feel softer, warmer, more alive. And I wanted to see her again, though I didn't dare admit it out loud just yet. It had only been a week since our last conversation. Yet somehow, I found myself looking forward to stepping into that cafe as if it were more than a place. As if it were the thread that kept pulling us together. And there she was again, seated by the window this time, the afternoon sun tracing gentle lines across her face. I almost walked past her table, not wanting to intrude, but she looked up before I could. That same faint smile appeared, warm and knowing. "You again," she said softly, as if she'd been waiting. I sat down across from her without overthinking it. Conversation flowed as easily as before, as though we were continuing a chapter we hadn't finished. But this time, something shifted. She mentioned her reading glasses had been giving her trouble, sliding down no matter how she adjusted them. Without thinking, I pulled a small strip of adhesive padding from my bag, something I'd been carrying for months to fix my own. "These might help," I said, offering it. Her brows rose in surprise. "You carry things like this around?" I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I like being prepared." She leaned back, studying me for a moment, before shaking her head with a quiet laugh. "You're full of surprises." The way she said it lingered in the air. Not just playful, but touched with something deeper. Admiration, maybe, or wonder. For a woman who seemed so composed, so unshakable, that flicker of genuine astonishment felt like a small victory, though I didn't dare admit it out loud. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, not from pride but from the way she looked at me, her eyes softer, almost searching. To ease the weight of the moment, I told her about the time I'd learned to play piano, surprising friends who thought I couldn't manage more than a few clumsy notes. She asked, curious if I still remembered. I hesitated, then pointed toward the small upright piano tucked into the cafe's corner, usually ignored by everyone. She raised a brow, daring me silently. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sat down at the piano. My hands trembled slightly, but muscle memory carried me. A simple tune filled the room, unpolished but heartfelt. I didn't dare look back until I finished. When I finally turned, she was watching me with a softness I hadn't seen before, her chin resting on her hand, eyes steady on mine. As I walked back to the table, she shook her head slowly, smiling. "Full of surprises," she repeated, this time in a whisper, as if speaking more to herself than to me. Her hand brushed my arm as I sat back down. Just a touch, light as a feather, yet it anchored me completely. My skin burned where her fingers had been, and for a moment, the noise of the cafe faded away. It was only a glance, only a touch, only a few words, but I knew then, she was starting to see me differently, and I couldn't stop myself from wanting her to. The days that followed felt different. Every time I stepped into that cafe, I no longer wondered if I would see her, but rather when. And each time, the air between us seemed to hum with a quiet energy, an invisible thread pulling us closer, even when neither of us said it outright. But with closeness came hesitation. One evening, the cafe was nearly empty, the light outside fading into that soft golden hour. She and I had ended up on a walk after, neither of us eager to say goodbye. The streets were quiet, lined with trees whose branches swayed in the faint evening breeze. At first, we walked with the comfortable ease of two people who had found a rhythm together. Our conversation stretched from trivial things, the weather, a funny story from her work, to subtler, heavier thoughts that seemed to slip out when the world was hushed. Yet beneath her calm voice, I noticed a distance she hadn't shown before. Her laughter would fade quickly, her gaze drifting forward instead of toward me. Her steps slowed, almost uncertain. I could sense it, something holding her back. At one point, our shoulders brushed as we walked side by side. It wasn't intentional. The sidewalk was narrow, and the space between us almost demanded closeness. For a heartbeat, she didn't move away. I felt the warmth of her arm against mine, the soft press of fabric to fabric. And then, just as quickly, she edged slightly to the side, creating space again. That small movement cut through me more sharply than it should have. I glanced at her. Her expression was composed, but her lips pressed into the faintest line. When she finally spoke, her voice was light, too light, as though covering something. You know, people talk. They always do. The words weren't direct, but I understood. The difference in our years, the way others might see us, the invisible barrier between what felt right in the moment and what might be judged by the world outside. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care, that her company mattered more than anyone else's opinion. But something held me back. She didn't need grand declarations. She needed patience, proof, not promises. So instead, I simply walked beside her in silence. Our hands swung loosely at our sides, almost close enough to touch. I could feel the tension of it, the electricity of what might happen if I dared to close the distance. My fingers ached with the impulse, yet I held back. When we reached the corner where our paths split, she paused. For a moment, she looked at me as though wanting to say something heavier, something real. But instead, she only gave a polite smile, the kind you give when you're trying to steady your own heart. "Good night," she said softly. Her voice lingered long after she walked away, and so did the quiet ache of everything unspoken between us. I didn't see her for several days after that walk, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't bother me. I told myself she was simply busy, that life had pulled her elsewhere. But in the quiet of my apartment, I kept replaying that evening. The way she had stepped back, the faint heaviness in her smile, the words that seemed to warn me of boundaries she wasn't sure she could cross. When she finally appeared at the cafe again, I almost didn't recognize the look in her eyes. There was warmth still, but beneath it, a shadow of something else, worry, perhaps, maybe even guilt. I hesitated, but when our eyes met, she gave me that small, familiar smile. It was enough. I sat across from her, and for a while we danced around ordinary topics. Work, books, even a joke about the cafe's new menu. But I could sense her distraction. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup again and again, her gaze wandering toward the window as though she wasn't sure she should be here. Finally, she sighed, a long, tired sound, and set her cup down. "I need to say something," she murmured, her voice quieter than usual. I leaned in, not wanting to miss a word. "This?" She gestured vaguely between us, her eyes flicking toward me before dropping to the table. "It feels good. Too good, maybe. But I keep thinking, what are people going to say? I'm older. Old enough to know better. And you?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "You're young. You should be living your life without someone like me complicating it." Her words stung, though not because of what she thought of herself. They stung because I could hear the sincerity in her voice, the fear she carried not for herself, but for me. I let the silence settle for a moment, then spoke softly. "You're not a complication. Not to me." She looked up then, her eyes searching mine as if trying to measure whether I truly meant it. For the first time, I saw something beneath her composure, a flicker of vulnerability. The kind you don't show the world unless you trust someone enough to let the mask slip. Slowly, Without overthinking, I reached across the table and rested my hand gently over hers. Her hand tensed at first, a reflex of hesitation, but then her thumb shifted, just barely, brushing against my knuckles. The smallest of movements, yet it carried the weight of an entire unspoken conversation. Her eyes softened, though her voice trembled when she spoke again. You don't understand. Once people see us, once they start talking, it won't be easy to go back. I know, I whispered, but I'm not afraid of that. I'm only afraid of not seeing where this could go. For a long moment, she said nothing. Only her hand remained beneath mine, warm and steady, her thumb still moving as though caught between doubt and longing. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. It was simply honesty laid bare, and in that small, fragile space, I felt closer to her than ever before. After that afternoon, something between us shifted. She hadn't fully let go of her doubts. I could see them still, flickering in her eyes, weighing down her pauses. But I also felt the difference in the way she looked at me now. There was softness in her gaze, a quiet searching, as if she were testing whether she could trust what was growing between us. One evening, we ended up lingering outside long after the cafe had closed. The streets were mostly empty, washed in the faint glow of streetlights. The air carried the crisp bite of night, and she pulled her shawl a little closer around her shoulders. Without thinking, I shrugged off my jacket and offered it to her. She hesitated, then accepted, slipping it around herself. You're making this harder, she said with a faint smile, though her eyes betrayed the seriousness beneath the words. Harder? I asked. Harder to pretend that this doesn't mean something. She shook her head lightly. I keep telling myself I know better, that I shouldn't let this go further. But you keep showing me things I didn't expect. I swallowed the knot in my throat, stepping a little closer. Like what? She tilted her head, her smile wistful. Like patience, kindness, the way you listen. I didn't think someone your age would care about those things. Her laugh was soft, self-conscious. And yet here you are, proving me wrong at every turn. Her words should have made me proud, but all I felt was the weight of her doubt pressing between us again. I didn't want her to see me as a fleeting surprise, something temporary that she'd one day regret letting in. So I held her gaze, steady and unflinching. If you think you've already seen everything about me, I said quietly, you're wrong. Her brow furrowed slightly. I let the silence stretch, then added with a faint smile, you haven't seen anything yet. The words came out simple, unpolished, but they carried every ounce of truth I had. I wasn't here for a moment of her attention. I was here for all of it, her laughter, her doubts, her fears, her guarded heart. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she searched my face as if trying to find some hidden crack, some sign that I was only saying what she wanted to hear. When she didn't find it, her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, she looked away, shaking her head lightly, but there was no dismissal in it, only a quiet surrender. Her hand, wrapped in the folds of my jacket, brushed against mine, just barely. A touch so faint I almost wondered if she meant it. But then her fingers lingered, staying close. In that stillness, under the muted glow of the streetlight, her silence spoke louder than words. She was letting me in, even if just an inch at a time. And for me, that was enough. The night we lingered under the streetlight stayed with me. I thought of it often. The way her hand brushed mine, the way her silence wasn't distance but permission. From that moment on, every time we met carried a gentleness, as though we were both slowly learning how to exist in this space we had created together. One evening, instead of the cafe, we found ourselves sitting on a park bench not far from the river. The water moved quietly, catching glimmers of light from the lamps along the walkway. It wasn't crowded, just a few couples passing by, the air cool but calm. She sat beside me, wrapped in her shawl, and for a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like the kind you share with someone who doesn't need to fill every pause with words. I watched as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her face softened by the glow of the nearby lamp. She looked peaceful, but also contemplative, like she was still carrying the weight of questions she hadn't voiced yet. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. Her head turned toward me, eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "Regret what?" "Letting this happen," I said, motioning gently between us. "Letting me in." For a moment she didn't answer. Then, slowly, she shook her head. "No, I don't regret it. I just wonder where it can go. People don't always understand." Her lips curved into a faint, almost fragile smile. "But I can't deny that being with you feels different. Good. Safer than I expected." Her honesty carried a weight that filled my chest with warmth. Without overthinking, I let my arm rest along the back of the bench, close enough that she could lean in if she wanted. And she did. Her head found its way to my shoulder, slowly, as if testing whether it was allowed. When she settled there, I felt the soft press of her hair against my jaw, the steady rhythm of her breathing easing against me. For a long while we just sat like that, watching the river move. My hand found hers, tentative at first, fingers brushing lightly until they threaded together. Her palm was warm, her grip gentle, but the way she held on told me everything I needed to know. Neither of us spoke about the future that night. We didn't try to define what this was or where it was heading. Instead, we let the silence speak for us. The closeness, the warmth, the quiet acknowledgement that something had begun, and neither of us wanted to turn away from it. When it grew late, she finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine with a softness that made my heart ache in the best way. "You really are full of surprises," she murmured. I smiled, leaning just close enough for my words to reach only her. "And you haven't seen anything yet." The look she gave me then wasn't hesitant, nor guarded. It was hopeful, quiet but undeniable. And in that moment, I knew whatever pace this would take, however uncertain the path might be, we had already begun walking it together.